Jackson, Mississippi. A sweltering night in July 2012. David and Emily Whitaker leave their home in a silver Chevrolet Malibu and vanish into the darkness. Minutes later, their final images appear on a gas station camera. By midnight, their phones fall silent at the Ross Barnett Reservoir. No wreckage, no skid marks, no sign of life. The lake is searched again and again, and nothing is found. For 10 years, the case freezes in silence until 2022, when a civilian dive team returns with modern sonar. Beneath layers of mud, the Malibu is discovered with its doors sealed and seatbelts fastened. Inside lie the skeletal remains of David and Emily, but investigators also uncover a bloodstain on the driver's side door. It does not belong to either victim. That single detail changes everything. It proves a third person was in the car, and that the scene was staged to look like an accident. Was the person close enough to sit in that car and leave blood behind? How could a killer bury the truth underwater for more than a decade without leaving a trace above the surface? If you want to uncover the answers to these questions, like this video, and subscribe to my channel, Unscripted Tales. Tell me from which city you are watching this cold case story, and let us complete 5,000 likes on this video to keep bringing you more stories where hidden truths finally rise to the surface. The night of July 14, 2012 begins in silence. The Whitaker daughters sleep in their rooms as the hum of the air conditioner fills the hallway. Their parents stepped quietly out the front door. The silver Malibu waits under the dim glow of a street lamp. At 11:15 the engine turns over and the headlights carve through the suburban dark. The storm line builds in the distance. On Interstate 55, the traffic is sparse. A truck driver later recalls a Malibu pulled to the shoulder with its hood raised. A faint yellow work light flickers. At 11:30, the couple appear on security footage at a small gas station. David buys a canned coffee. Emily scrolls her phone and glances nervously toward the door. At 11:47, their phones go dead by the western shore of the Ross Barnett Reservoir. That is the last trace. From that moment forward, nothing more is seen or heard. 10 years later, the reservoir gives up its secret. A car buried in mud. 2 victims still seatbelted inside, and a single bloodstain left behind by someone who should never have been there. The summer night in Jackson was heavy with heat. The kind of heat that clings to the skin and makes the air feel thick. Humidity rose from the ground like steam, and the sky above rumbled with distant thunder. Trees along the quiet suburban street swayed as the wind shifted with the smell of rain. Inside the Whitaker home, 2 young daughters slept peacefully. The hallway light glowed faintly against tiled floors. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Toys were neatly stacked in a corner. A bottle of baby formula still lingered on the kitchen counter. Everything carried the warmth of a family home that expected to wake together the next morning. But this night was different. David and Emily stepped softly out the front door. They pulled it closed behind them, leaving their daughters safe in bed. In the driveway, a silver 2008 Chevrolet Malibu waited under the dim glow of a street lamp. Its paint caught a pale shine. In the dark, David started the engine at exactly 11:15. The headlights cut through the shadows of the neighborhood. Slowly, the car rolled away from the house and merged onto the empty stretch of road leading toward the highway. It was a simple beginning that should have ended with their safe return before dawn. Yet their quiet exit would become the final time the family home ever saw them alive. The storm building in the sky seemed to follow as they drove north. And somewhere between that quiet street and the open road, the mystery of their disappearance began to take shape. What happened to the silver Malibu once it left the safety of the neighborhood and entered the dark roads beyond? The Malibu left the neighborhood and merged onto Interstate 55. The road stretched out like a black ribbon under the stormy sky. Traffic was thin that night. Only the occasional truck rumbled past in the humid dark. The air smelled of rain, and the low growl of thunder rolled over the horizon. One truck driver later recalled seeing a silver Malibu pulled to the shoulder. Its hood was raised and a faint yellow glow spilled from the inside. He caught a glimpse of 2 figures near the car before his rig carried him past. It lasted only seconds, but it etched into memory as one of the few reported sightings before the couple disappeared. At 11:30, the Malibu turned into a small roadside gas station. The security camera captured grainy images that would become the final confirmed moments of David and Emily alive. David walked slowly to the counter. His face looked tired as he placed a canned coffee on the counter. Emily stood beside him. She tapped quickly on her phone and kept glancing toward the glass doors as if she felt uneasy about something outside. The clip lasted less than 2 minutes. No strangers approached them. No argument unfolded. The camera blinked once more as the automatic doors slid shut behind them. Moments later, the Malibu pulled out of the gas station lot and its headlights disappeared into the dark highway. After that brief stop, there would never be another confirmed sighting. No other camera picked up the Malibu. No toll booth or store along the interstate recorded their passing. It was as if the car had driven into the shadows and simply vanished. Why did both phones go silent only minutes after this final sighting? And why did their trail end by the waters of the reservoir? When the Malibu left the gas station, it rolled back onto the interstate and headed north. For a short stretch, the phones of David and Emily still connected with nearby towers. At 11:47, the last signals were logged. Both devices stopped at almost the same second. The final location placed them by the western edge of the Ross Barnett Reservoir. After that, there was nothing. No outgoing calls, no texts, no social media pings. It was as though both phones had been switched off at once. Technicians later studied the data and marked that last green dot on a digital map. It sat close to a narrow inlet of the reservoir. That small point of light was the last proof that the couple and their car had ever existed beyond the gas station footage. Then, the storm that had been building all night swept over the area. Rain came hard. Wind lashed against the lake, and thunder echoed across the dark water. Any trace on the roads or the shore was washed away in minutes. This sudden silence changed everything. Couples do not simply vanish together in the same moment unless something forces it. Investigators knew the answer to what happened next lay somewhere between that final green dot and the restless water of the reservoir. What could cause two phones to die at the same moment on the very edge of a lake during a storm? The morning of July 15th began with silence inside the Whitaker home. Two little girls woke and wandered into the kitchen, expecting to find their parents. There was no sound of coffee mugs clinking, no smell of breakfast. Only the low hum of the air conditioner filled the rooms. Their grandmother arrived soon after to check on them, and what she found chilled her. The couple's bed was still neatly made. The car was gone, and no one had returned home through the night. She dialed both David and Emily again and again, but only heard the lifeless message that the phones were unreachable. Her hands shook as she called the sheriff's office to report her son and daughter-in-law missing. By 8 o'clock that morning, Sheriff Randall Hayes was at the scene. A veteran officer with decades on the force, he understood the urgency. The first hours of a disappearance were a golden window. He ordered immediate action. One team was sent north on Interstate 55 to sweep rest stops and side roads. A second unit launched boats into the reservoir to scan the shoreline where the phones had last signaled. Another group went door to door in the neighborhood, gathering information from anyone who might have seen or heard the couple leave. By the afternoon, Hayes faced the press. Behind him, maps of the interstate and the reservoir were pinned on the wall. His voice was steady but heavy. He explained 3 working theories. Perhaps the couple had left voluntarily, though it seemed unlikely given the 2 daughters left behind. Perhaps they had crashed into the lake or along a remote road, although no wreckage or marks were found. And the third possibility was the darkest of all. That a crime had been committed and someone had made them disappear. None of the theories sat comfortably. And as cameras clicked and questions shouted, Hayes knew the real mystery still waited to be uncovered. What if the search widened and the answers still refused to appear? The second day of the search brought more questions than answers. Deputies spread through the Whitaker neighborhood, speaking with friends and neighbors who knew the couple well. The replies were steady and consistent. David and Emily were a loving pair. They were active in church. They cared deeply for their daughters. Not one person believed they would ever choose to leave their family behind. The idea of them running away voluntarily began to crumble under the weight of these voices. Investigators then examined their daily lives. David was a steady worker at a local construction company. He had recently been promised a new project that would bring better pay. Emily worked part-time at the elementary school and was known for her kindness with children. Financial records showed no sudden withdrawals. Their only major debt was their home mortgage, which was nearly paid off. Emily's best friend even recalled that she had been planning a summer trip to Biloxi for the family. These details painted a picture of stability and hope for the future, not escape. Meanwhile, the technical team dug deeper into the cell tower records. They calculated the time between the gas station sighting at 11:30 and the final phone signal at 11:47. The distance could normally be covered in around 10 to 12 minutes. Yet the couple disappeared over a span of nearly 17 minutes. That unexplained gap gnawed at investigators. Somewhere in those missing minutes, something had gone wrong. Theories of voluntary disappearance were pushed aside. Focus began to shift toward the possibility that the Whitakers had been stopped, delayed, or intercepted during that short but critical stretch of road. What could have filled that gap of missing time and turned a simple drive into a vanishing dot? By the third morning, the search for David and Emily had turned into one of the largest operations the county had seen in years. Helicopters swept low across the Ross Barnett Reservoir, scanning the surface with infrared cameras. Boats pushed through the choppy waters, dropping sonar equipment into the deep. Divers entered the lake with heavy lights and oxygen tanks, searching every shadow below the surface. Along the shoreline, deputies walked shoulder to shoulder, scanning for tire tracks or broken glass. But the storm that struck on the night of their disappearance had erased almost everything. Any marks that may have been on the ground were washed away by heavy rain. Each day ended with frustration. Divers surfaced carrying nothing more than tree limbs, old blocks of concrete, or rotting wood, tangled in mud. No car, no license plate, no sign of the Whitakers. The vast water of the reservoir looked calm on the surface, but it kept its silence. Even fishermen questioned around the lake reported nothing unusual. Only thunder and wind had filled the night air. For 3 weeks, the search continued with no results. The media camped by the shore at first, filming the helicopters and interviewing worried neighbors. The story filled local broadcasts day after day. But as weeks passed and hope faded, attention slowly shifted to other headlines. A fire in the city. An upcoming election. News vans left the reservoir one by one. The Whitaker family remained by the water, waiting each time a diver broke the surface, each time hearing the same words, nothing found. By the end of that summer, the case began to lose the strength of daily urgency. It became a mystery with no evidence to hold on to. What happens to a community when a family vanishes, and the only place left to search is a lake that refuses to give up its secrets? By the summer of 2013, the search efforts had slowed to a quiet halt. The file on David and Emily Whitaker was sealed and moved into the shelves of unsolved cases. For the police, it was marked as pending investigation. For the family, it became a wound that never closed. Each year, on July 14th, the Whitakers' relatives and friends gathered at the same small church. Candles were lit. The couple's wedding photo was placed before the altar. Their daughters sat with their grandmother in silence. Anna was 8 when her parents vanished. Grace was 6. As the years passed, they grew older, but the shadow of that night grew with them. They learned to hide their pain in classrooms. They avoided questions from curious classmates. They carried the absence of their parents into every milestone of childhood. Investigators reopened the file from time to time when a new tip surfaced. Sometimes a fisherman thought he saw something strange in the reservoir. Sometimes a local swore a car was under the water. Each time divers checked and found nothing. The old sonar could not pierce the thick mud at the bottom of the lake. Rookie detectives were often handed the Whitaker case to study. It became a lesson in how a disappearance could remain unsolved even with endless manpower and long hours. The file was thick with reports, but thin on answers. For the city of Jackson, the memory of David and Emily never fully disappeared. People whispered about them at church gatherings. Neighbors spoke their names with pity in grocery aisles. Whenever a new missing person story broke, the Whitakers were mentioned as a reminder of how quickly a family could vanish without a trace. Time dulled the headlines, but it never erased the unease. What happens when a case buried in silence for nearly a decade suddenly stirs back to life with the promise of new technology and fresh eyes? By the start of 2022, nearly 10 years had passed since the night David and Emily Whitaker disappeared. Their case sat deep in the shelves of the sheriff's office until an unexpected call arrived. A civilian diving group known as the Delta Recovery Unit offered to take a fresh look. Led by founder Travis Miller, a former Navy diver with years of experience, and sonar expert Cole Johnson, the group had gained respect for solving cold cases across the South. They brought technology the original investigators never had. High-resolution side-scan, sonar and live-scope equipment capable of showing details down to the shape of individual tires. Beneath layers of mud, Travis and Cole met with Sheriff Randall Hayes, who was nearing retirement but still haunted by the Whitaker file. They spread out maps of the Ross Barnett Reservoir on the table. Their proposal was clear. The team would divide the massive lake into a grid and move slowly at 2 miles per hour, scanning every strip of water with precision. No section would be left unchecked. If a suspicious object appeared, they would mark it, test it with magnets, and if confirmed as metal, send divers to verify. For Hayes, it was a difficult decision. He had watched years of failed searches and fading hope. Yet the confidence in the voices of Travis and Cole stirred something he had nearly lost. He granted them official permission and reopened the long-closed case file. Word spread quickly across Jackson. Headlines announced that the most famous cold case in the city would finally be searched again. The community gathered by the reservoir's edge as the Delta Recovery Unit prepared their aluminum boat and sonar screens. Families who had once searched in the early days stood quietly watching. Some carried hope in their eyes. Others feared disappointment would strike again. The water lay calm, but carried the weight of 10 years of silence. Would the reservoir that held its secrets for so long finally reveal the truth about the missing Malibu? While the Delta Recovery Unit prepared their methodical sweep of the reservoir, a young investigator named Rachel Moore was assigned a different task. She was known in the department for her sharp eye and her refusal to accept vague answers. Rachel carried the thick Whitaker case file into a quiet records room and spread it across the table. She marked each event with red ink, building a timeline, from the couple leaving their home to their last signal at the reservoir. The closer she studied, the clearer one detail became, from the gas station sighting at 11:30 to the final phone ping at 11:47. There was a 17-minute gap. The distance between those 2 points should have taken no more than 12 minutes to drive. That meant 5 minutes were unaccounted for. In the silence of that missing time, something had happened. Rachel compared old topographic maps with updated versions. She discovered that several small roads once leading down to the water had been abandoned after a major storm in 2015. Those roads were no longer obvious, but in 2012 they would have still been open. They could have provided direct access to the western shore, the very place where the phones went dark. She highlighted one narrow inlet in particular. It sat close to the final signal point and matched the location where a truck driver had reported seeing a silver car pulled to the shoulder with its hood raised. The original search teams had focused on the main body of the reservoir near the dam. These smaller inlets had been overlooked. Rachel circled them in red and wrote a note in her book. If the Malibu was forced off the road and into the water, this was the most likely place. Her findings gave new direction to the ongoing search. The map that had once been covered with scattered pins now showed a clear target zone. What secret waited beneath those quiet western inlets were the trail of David and Emily had gone dark. The Delta Recovery Unit began their grid sweep at dawn. Their aluminum boat moved slowly across the reservoir, no faster than 2 miles per hour, as Cole Johnson studied the sonar screens with sharp concentration. Hours passed with nothing but shadows of tree trunks and scattered debris. Then, as the boat slid across a narrow western inlet, Cole leaned closer to the display. On the screen appeared a shape that did not belong to nature. Straight edges, rounded corners, nearly 15 feet long, half buried in the mud. It was the outline of a sedan. Travis Miller steadied himself at the bow. He had seen this kind of reading before. He knew it was no log, no boulder. This was man-made. They circled back and scanned from several angles. Each pass sharpened the image. 4 wheels were visible beneath layers of silt. A curved roof sloped downward into the mud. The boat grew silent. Rachel Moore clutched her notebook tightly. Everyone knew what they were looking at. An orange buoy was dropped to mark the spot. Travis called Sheriff Hayes immediately. Within the hour, police cars lined the shoreline. Yellow tape was stretched to secure the area. Cameras and evidence teams gathered as divers prepared their suits. Travis and Cole descended into the dark water guided by a safety line. Visibility was nearly zero, the water thick with mud and algae. They felt their way forward until Travis's hand brushed against cold metal. His fingers cleared away sediment until an emblem appeared faintly under the beam of his flashlight. The Chevrolet logo gleamed back at him. He moved lower, scraping mud from the rear bumper. Numbers came into view. The license plate matched the one written in the Whitaker case file above the surface. When the divers tugged the rope 3 times, the signal of confirmation, Sheriff Hayes closed his eyes for a moment. The car that had haunted him for 10 years was finally found. The area was locked down. Evidence teams prepared for recovery. The reservoir that had hidden its secret for a decade had finally spoken. What would investigators uncover once the car was lifted from the water, and its doors forced open after so many silent years? As the orange buoy bobbed on the surface, the shoreline filled with silence. A mobile crane rumbled into position. Steel cables were lowered into the water, and divers secured them around the frame of the buried car. The machinery groaned as the cables tightened. Mud churned upward into clouds. And then the silver hood of a sedan broke through the surface. Water poured from shattered glass as algae and debris clung to the metal. Officers quickly raised tarps around the scene to block the growing crowd. The Malibu was lowered onto a waiting trailer, and forensic teams in white suits stepped forward. They pried open the doors carefully. Inside were 2 skeletal forms still strapped into the front seats, seatbelts locked across their ribs as if they had never been able to leave the car. On one bony hand, a tarnished wedding ring glinted faintly. On the other side, a rusted wristwatch clung to a wrist bone. The artifacts were enough for the family to know who was inside, but protocol demanded confirmation. The remains were prepared for DNA testing to officially verify them as David and Emily Whitaker. Every movement inside the car was filmed. Each item was bagged and labeled. Investigators scanned the interior with ultraviolet light. That was when they saw it. A faint glowing trace smeared on the driver's side door. A blood stain. Samples were collected at once and rushed to the lab. It was too small to belong to the victims, and that detail unsettled every officer at the scene. The reservoir had given back the car and the couple, but it had also handed over a new and troubling mystery. Whose blood had been left inside the Malibu on the night it vanished beneath the storm dot at the Mississippi State Forensic Lab? The recovered remains of David and Emily Whitaker were examined with the highest care. The bones told a story that the water could not erase. David's skull carried a long crack from temple to the back of his head, sharp and clean, the mark of a heavy blow. Emily's skull showed a caved fracture at the forehead, with spiderweb lines spreading outward. Their ribs were broken in multiple places. These were not injuries caused by a sinking car. They were injuries from violence, delivered while they were still alive. The conclusion was unmistakable. The Whitakers had been murdered before the Malibu ever entered the reservoir, as forensic teams dismantled the mud-filled interior. More clues surfaced. Near the driver's side floor, a leather wallet was pulled out, rotted and empty. The family later confirmed that David always carried cash for emergencies. Its absence hinted at robbery or a staged theft. From the backseat, an old Nokia phone was recovered, its casing cracked but its SIM card intact. Investigators believed it might hold the final messages sent before the silence of that night. But the most unsettling discovery remained the blood on the driver's door. Tests confirmed what many feared. It did not match David. It did not match Emily. It belonged to someone else. A third presence inside that car. A person who had bled during the struggle and then disappeared for 10 years without ever being identified. The Malibu was no longer evidence of a tragic accident. It was proof of a crime carefully hidden beneath the water. Who was the third person? Whose blood marked the inside of the car, and how close had they been to the Whitakers on that final night? Inside the evidence storage facility, the Malibu sat. Under bright lights, its every surface examined, piece by piece. The foreign blood on the driver's side door was secured and catalogued. It was a thin stain, nearly invisible to the naked eye, but under testing it carried a full DNA profile. That did not belong to either victim. That single trace became the cornerstone of what was now officially a double homicide case. Investigators moved next to the driver's side floor mat. Pressed into the mud was a clear shoe impression. The tread pattern was wide and heavy, cut in a herringbone style common to work boots. The size was larger than David's own shoes. It suggested that another man had been in the driver's seat that night. Someone taller, broader, and used to heavy labor. The shoe print was photographed, lifted, and entered into the database. From the back seat came another fragile clue. The battered Nokia phone, thought useless after years underwater, still carried its SIM card intact. It was sealed and shipped to the state's digital forensics lab, where specialists would attempt to extract messages and contacts that could have survived in its memory. Even a single fragment of data could open a path back to that night. Step by step, a picture of a third person began to form. A man strong enough to overpower the couple. Large enough to leave behind a size 11 work boot print. Injured enough to leave his blood on the car. And reckless enough to believe the reservoir would hide every trace forever. Who was this man who left his mark in the Whitakers' final moments? And why had he crossed paths with them on that storm-swept night? With new evidence pointing to a third person, investigators turned back to witnesses who had been questioned a decade earlier. Many of those interviews had been rushed, with details left out, or filed away without follow-up. Now every word mattered. The first stop was the gas station where David and Emily had last been seen on camera. The night manager, Janice Howard, still worked there. She was hesitant at first, but her memory was clear. She said that David had stepped outside after paying, only to be confronted by a tall man with long brown hair wearing a light-colored shirt. She remembered the man striking the glass door with his hand in anger while David kept his voice low. Emily stood nearby, anxious, glancing between them. Janice admitted that she had mentioned seeing someone outside back in 2012. But the officers only asked what the couple bought. No one pressed her for more. The second witness was a retired truck driver named Harold Benson. He had always insisted he saw something that night, but his story had been dismissed as uncertain. Harold recalled driving north when he spotted a silver car pulled to the roadside with its hood raised. Just behind it was a white pickup with its headlights off. A broad-shouldered man stood between the two vehicles, leaning toward the Malibu. Harold only saw the scene for seconds, but the image stayed with him for years. When both witnesses were shown a photo of an old acquaintance of David's, named Mark Ellison, their reactions were immediate. Janice said the man in the photo looked exactly like the one at the gas station. Harold agreed without hesitation that it matched the figure by the roadside. Two accounts, miles apart, describing the same man with the same build. The threads of memory and the fragments of evidence were beginning to weave together into a clear outline of a suspect. What would happen when investigators dug deeper into Mark Ellison's past and uncovered his ties to David Whitaker. The name Mark Ellison had been tucked inside the original case file for years, mentioned only in passing. But now, with two witnesses describing the same tall man with brown hair and a white pickup, his name rose to the surface with sharp clarity. Ellison was not a stranger. He had once been a friend of David Whitaker during high school. Later, they crossed paths in small construction deals, but their relationships soured over money. Family members remembered David saying he never wanted to deal with Ellison again because of unpaid debts and shady behavior. Asterisk records revealed that in 2012, Ellison owned a white Ford F-150, the same type of truck reported near the Malibu that night. He sold the vehicle a few years later, but registration logs proved he had it at the time of the disappearance. His financial situation was dire. He ran a struggling garage constantly burdened with lawsuits, overdue taxes, and bank loans. By midsummer, he was drowning in tens of thousands of dollars of debt. Investigators studied his timeline. On July 14th, he left his garage around 6 in the evening, visited a bar by 8, and left around 10. After that, he claimed he went home. Yet no one could verify it. He lived alone. He had no receipts. No neighbors who saw him. No proof at all. His alibi dissolved into empty air. And then, another piece of the puzzle emerged. 2 days after the Whitakers vanished, Ellison deposited $35,000 in cash into his account. It was far more than a small garage owner could explain. When questioned years before, he brushed it off as repayment from a friend. No records supported the claim. At the same time, David's wallet had been found empty in the recovered Malibu. Means, motive, and opportunity were circling around Ellison. He was in debt. He had access to a truck that witnesses recalled. He had no alibi during the crucial hours. And he came into a suspicious amount of money immediately after the disappearance. The pieces fit together too neatly to ignore. How would investigators tie Ellison's presence directly to that night? By the reservoir and prove beyond doubt that he was inside the Malibu. The more investigators pulled at the threads of Mark Ellison's past, the more tightly the net closed around him. Financial records revealed that on the very night David and Emily vanished, Ellison's credit card was used at a gas station along Route 25. The transaction time was logged at 10:45 p.m. Only minutes from one of the reservoir's western entrances. It placed him directly on the path where the Whitakers' phones would later go silent. Technology added another piece to the puzzle. Cell tower records from July 14th were re-examined with modern software. At 11:40, Ellison's phone pinged off a tower near the Ross Barnett Reservoir. It stayed in that sector until 11:50 before going dark. Those were the exact minutes when David and Emily's phones vanished from the network. Ellison was not home as he had claimed. For years, he was right where the couple disappeared. Then came the most chilling discovery. Technicians finally cracked the data on the old Nokia SIM card pulled from the back seat of the Malibu. Hidden within its memory was one final message sent at 11:42 p.m. from Emily Whitaker's phone. The words were short but heavy. With fear, someone is following us. That message froze the entire investigation team. It was not speculation. It was not rumor. It was the voice of a victim in her last known moment, telling the world what was happening. The evidence now formed. A tight chain. Ellison had fueled his truck on the way to the reservoir. His phone was traced there at the same time the Whitakers vanished. And Emily herself confirmed they were being followed. How would Ellison respond when confronted with this digital trail and a dying declaration that pointed directly at him? With the digital trail closing around him, Mark Ellison was summoned to Hinds County headquarters for formal questioning. The small interrogation room was stark, a scratched metal table under a single light, cameras fixed to the walls. Ellison walked in with a forced confidence, his worn leather jacket hanging loosely from his shoulders. He leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, and declared he had nothing to hide. When asked about the night of July 14th, he repeated the same story he had given 10 years earlier. He claimed that after leaving the bar, he went straight home, drank a beer, watched television, and went to bed. He insisted no one could confirm it because he lived alone, but he swore that was the truth. Investigators pressed him with the details they had uncovered. His credit card use near the reservoir, his phone pinging there at the same time the Whitakers disappeared. The blurry footage of a white pickup on the road. Each time he brushed it off, saying coincidences happen and thousands of trucks look alike. Then came the moment that changed everything. In a casual exchange, Ellison remarked that the Whitakers' car must have gone into the lake with the hood up. The investigators froze. That detail had never been made public. Only the original truck driver witness and the dive team who recovered the Malibu knew about the raised hood. Ellison should not have known. When pressed on how he could describe that, he fumbled. He laughed nervously and said it was just a guess. That cars often pop their hoods when they crash. But the damage was done. His knowledge betrayed him. He had seen that car before it disappeared beneath the water. The session ended with Ellison stone, silent, refusing to answer further. Officially, he was not arrested that day, but internally, the team marked him as the prime suspect. The only thing missing was direct biological evidence to tie him, beyond doubt, to the Malibu. Would the faint bloodstain on the driver's door hold the final proof? Investigators needed to bring Ellison down. The state laboratory finished the sequencing and sent a report thicker than a case binder. At the top of the summary was a single line that changed the room. The DNA from the blood on the driver's side door matched Mark Ellison with absolute certainty. No more guesses. No more maybes. The stain in the Malibu belonged to him, Sheriff. Randall Hayes read the result twice, closed his eyes for a moment, and told the team that the Whitaker file had just shifted from suspicion to proof, surveillance. Units moved into position the same day. Ellison's routines began to bend under the pressure. He sold equipment from his failing garage for quick cash. He made calls to a contact in Texas about finding temporary work. He drove different routes to the same places as if testing whether anyone followed him. In a bar, he muttered to a friend that police were circling and that people talk too much. Every note went onto the board. Every movement narrowed the window before he might run. Inside the sheriff's office, investigators built a strategy for a second sit-down that would leave no room to escape. On the table, they laid the chain in order. The Route 25 receipt that placed him on the approach to the reservoir. The cell tower pings that held him there from 11:40 to 11:50. The grainy clip of a white pickup heading toward the western entrance. The witness from the gas station who remembered a tall man with brown hair striking the glass. The truck driver who remembered the white pickup idling by the Malibu with its hood raised. Emily's final message that said someone is following us. And now the state lab report that tied Ellison's blood to the Malibu's door. Rachel Moore rehearsed the flow until every link locked to the next. She would begin with the timeline, move to location data, seal it with the message from the Nokia SIM, and then set down the lab's red-stamped page. There would be no speculation to argue against, only the voices of machines, the memory of witnesses, and the Mark Ellison himself left inside the car. What will a cornered man say when confronted by his own blood, his own movements, and the last words of the woman he hunted? Mark Ellison was called back into the interrogation room, but this time the atmosphere was heavy as stone. The file on the table was stacked high, each page waiting to be turned against him. Rachel Moore began calmly, laying out the timeline. The receipt that showed his truck fueling on Route 25 at 10:45. The cell tower records, placing his phone at the reservoir between 11:40 and 11:50. The surveillance clip of a white pickup heading into the same inlet where the Malibu was later found. Each piece landed in front of him like weights on the table. She moved next to the voices that still echoed from that night. The gas station manager who remembered him pounding the glass door. The truck driver who saw a white pickup idling near the Malibu with its hood raised. Then Emily's final message preserved on the old Nokia card. Someone is following us. Ellison stared at the words, his jaw tightening, but he offered no reply. Finally, Rachel placed the state lab report in front of him. The red seal at the top. confirmed the blood on the Malibu's door belonged to him with 100% certainty. His confidence cracked for the first time. He leaned back in his chair, laughed dryly, and said perhaps he had helped David with the car years earlier, cut his hand, and left the trace then. But Rachel pressed harder. Why was the blood on the driver's side door where both victims died with fractured skulls? Why was his DNA mixed into the very scene that had been hidden for 10 years beneath the reservoir? His explanation collapsed into silence. When another investigator casually referenced the raised hood, Ellison could not stop himself. He muttered again that yes, the hood was up. The details slipped from his lips as naturally as if he had been standing there watching. It was proof of memory, not of guesswork. The confrontation ended with Ellison sitting stiff and wordless, his silence louder than denial. The file against him was no longer a patchwork of guesses. It was a chain that could not be broken. How would the prosecutor now shape this chain of evidence into a case strong enough to carry the weight of justice into the courtroom? The evidence chain was finally strong enough to move from suspicion to prosecution. Prosecutor Harriet Collins, known for her sharp courtroom skill and her patience with complex cold cases, reviewed every page of the file. She listened to Emily's preserved message. She studied the cell tower logs and financial records. She examined the lab's confirmation that Ellison's blood was inside the Malibu. After weeks of careful preparation, she stood before the judge with a case that was airtight. Her closing words carried weight. One drop of blood waited 12 years to speak, and now it names Mark Ellison. The judge signed, without hesitation. The arrest warrant charged Ellison with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of staging. A crime scene surveillance had already shown signs of urgency in Ellison's movements. He sold tools from his garage. He hinted to friends that he might leave Mississippi. He called out-of-state contacts about disappearing for a while. Fearing he could slip away, the task force acted swiftly. On an April morning in Vicksburg, a quiet neighborhood was suddenly surrounded. 7 police vehicles blocked the street. A SWAT team stormed the garage where Ellison worked. He looked up, startled, as officers shouted his name and closed in. He moved toward a back exit, but was quickly overpowered. Cold handcuffs snapped around his wrists. The man who had haunted the Whitaker family for more than a decade was finally in custody. Neighbors gathered outside in shock as Ellison was led to a waiting patrol car. Phones recorded the moment, and within hours, the images spread across social media and local news. Jackson reacted instantly. Churches rang their bells. Families who had prayed at yearly memorials wept at the sight of Ellison being taken away. For the Whitaker daughters, who had grown into young women without answers, it was the first step toward justice they had been promised. How would a courtroom weigh 12 years of silence, fragments of evidence, and a family's unbroken fight for truth when Ellison finally stood trial? On September 12, 2024, the courthouse in Jackson filled before dawn. People gathered with candles and photographs of David and Emily Whitaker, holding them close like symbols of justice. Long delayed. Inside, the trial began with heavy silence as Mark Ellison was led to his seat in a gray suit. His hair was graying, but his eyes still tried to project defiance. Prosecutor Harriet Collins opened with steady precision. She laid out the case in pillars. First, the DNA that matched Ellison to the bloodstain on the Malibu's driver door. Next, the cell tower records that placed his phone at the reservoir during the exact window when the Whitakers vanished. She showed the jury the grainy video of a white pickup driving toward the western inlet, overlaying it with Ellison's ownership records for a Ford F-150. Then came Emily's final message retrieved from the Nokia SIM card. Her last words written at 11:42 p.m. "Someone is following us." Collins closed this sequence with financial records, pointing to Ellison's sudden deposit of $35,000 2 days after the disappearance, while David's wallet sat empty inside the recovered car. Witnesses were called to strengthen the chain. Janice Howard took the stand, her hands shaking but her memory firm. She described the tall man with long brown hair slamming his hand against the gas station door while David tried to keep calm. When asked to identify him, she pointed directly at Ellison. Then Harold Benson, the retired truck driver, described the sight of the Malibu by the roadside with its hood up and a white pickup parked just behind it. He, too, identified Ellison as the man he saw that night. Their accounts, separated by miles and minutes, converged in front of the jury. The defense pushed back, arguing that Ellison's DNA could have come from an innocent encounter years earlier, that the video was too blurry to confirm the pickup, that the financial deposit was simply repayment of an old debt. But Collins dismantled each argument. If the blood was from an old repair, why was it on the driver's side door, right where the victims died? If the video was too unclear, why did Ellison's phone ping the reservoir at that exact moment? And if the money was a loan, why was there no record, no contract, nothing but Ellison's word? Piece by piece, the alternatives collapsed, leaving only the path of guilt. The courtroom air grew heavier with each testimony, each record, each photograph. For the jury, the narrative was no longer scattered fragments, but a complete story pointing to one man. Would the jury see through Ellison's last defense and deliver the verdict that the Whitaker family had waited more than a decade to hear? The jury withdrew to deliberate, leaving the courtroom in tense silence. Hours passed slowly, every tick of the clock echoing like a drumbeat. Finally, the jurors filed back in, their faces unreadable. The foreperson stood, voice steady but heavy, with weight, and delivered the words that shattered 12 years of uncertainty. We find the defendant, Mark Ellison, guilty of first-degree murder of David Whitaker. Guilty of first-degree murder of Emily Whitaker. The courtroom erupted with gasps, tears, and quiet prayers. The Whitaker family clung together, their long wait for justice finally answered. Weeks later, on October 18th, the courtroom was filled once again for sentencing. Mark Ellison sat motionless, his once defiant expression now hollow. The judge spoke firmly, recounting the DNA evidence, the witness identifications, the financial records, and the dying message of Emily Whitaker. With all of it laid before the court, there was only one sentence fitting the crime: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The sound of the gavel striking carried through the chamber like a final verdict from history itself. Then came the voices of the daughters, who had grown up without their parents. Anna stepped forward first, her voice trembling yet strong. She spoke of 12 years of nights spent wondering if her parents would ever come home, of childhood milestones marked by absence instead of celebration, and of the relief that the truth had finally come to light. Grace followed, tears streaming, as she said their parents could now rest, and that she and her sister would carry their memory forward every day of their lives. Their words brought tears across the courtroom, even among strangers who had only followed the case from afar. For Jackson, it was more than a sentence. It was closure for a community haunted by a mystery, a reminder that even a crime buried under a reservoir for a decade could not stay hidden forever. But for Anna and Grace, justice came with the shadow of grief. Because no verdict could bring back the parents they lost as children. How would this case be remembered in Mississippi and beyond? And what lessons would it leave about truth, justice, and the power of persistence? After the sentencing, the community of Jackson gathered once more by the calm waters of the Ross Barnett Reservoir. It was the place that had hidden the truth for so long, and now it became a place of remembrance. A bronze plaque was unveiled near the western shore, engraved with the names of David and Emily Whitaker, and the words, "Justice after 12 years." Flowers were placed beneath it, candles flickered in the evening wind, and for the first time in over a decade, the reservoir felt less like a grave and more like a memorial. Sheriff Randall Hayes, now close to retirement, addressed the crowd. His voice was steady, but carried the wear of years spent chasing shadows. He spoke about the power of persistence, about the technology that had allowed truth to surface when human effort alone had failed, and about the importance of never allowing a case to fade into silence. His words carried across the water like a vow. To every family still waiting for answers. The emotional heart of the gathering came when Anna and Grace stepped forward. No longer the small children who had woken alone on that summer morning in 2012, they now stood as young women, shaped by grief, but defined by resilience. Anna spoke of carrying her parents' memory with strength rather than sorrow, while Grace reminded the community that their story was also a story of love, unity, and the fight for truth. Their voices were no longer marked by uncertainty, but by the determination of daughters who had seen justice finally prevail. The community listened in silence. The sun sinking behind the reservoir, casting gold across the water, it was a reminder that even the darkest mysteries could be uncovered, that silence could break, and that justice, though late, could still arrive. And yet, as people left the shoreline, one question lingered quietly in the air. How many more secrets still rest beneath the waters and shadows of forgotten places, waiting for the day someone refuses to stop searching? The Whitaker case did not end only in the courtroom. It left behind lessons that echoed far beyond Jackson. One of the most powerful reminders was how technology had become a silent witness. It was sonar scanning that revealed the hidden Malibu beneath the reservoir's mud. It was DNA sequencing that proved whose blood marked the car door. It was cell tower data that traced a phone's path through the night. And it was an old SIM card that carried Emily's final cry for help. Together, these tools showed that even when human eyes fail, machines can preserve the truth until the right moment arrives. The case also underlined the oldest of motives: money. A $35,000 cash deposit that appeared just 2 days after the disappearance was more than a coincidence. It showed how financial records can whisper when human voices stay silent. Watching for sudden, unexplained wealth is not only a matter for banks, it is a clue that can shift an investigation from confusion to clarity. And then there was the role of the community. For years, Jackson gathered at churches, lit candles, and kept the names of David and Emily alive. That persistence mattered. Without it, the file might have gathered dust until memory faded entirely. Instead, the case was carried forward by the Whitaker family's resilience, and by neighbors who refused to let silence bury the truth. In the end, the story of David and Emily is both a tragedy and a testament. A tragedy, because 2 lives were stolen in the dark of a July night. A testament because justice, though delayed, was not denied. It proved that communities must remain vigilant, that families must hold on to hope, and that truth, no matter how long buried, waits to rise again. And as the water of the reservoir glimmers quietly under the sun, one thought remains. How many other truths are still resting in silence, waiting for persistence, technology, and faith to finally bring them to light? The story of David and Emily Whitaker ends not with silence, but with answers that took 12 long years to surface. The reservoir that once held secrets now holds a plaque in their memory. The daughters who once searched the house in confusion are now young women who stood in court and watched justice delivered. The sheriff who carried the weight of failure now closes his career knowing persistence finally won. And the community of Jackson, which lived under the shadow of loss, now carries the proof that truth can never stay buried forever. The suspense that haunted every unanswered question has been resolved. We know how David and Emily's final night unfolded. We know who followed them. We know who left blood in the Malibu, and who pushed it into the reservoir. And we know that justice, though late, claimed its place with life imprisonment for Mark Ellison. It is a cold ending, because nothing can bring them back. Yet it is also an ending that carries meaning, because their story became a reminder of what technology, community, and sheer determination can achieve. If you are still here watching and listening to the very end of this story, it means the journey of David and Emily Whitaker touched you. That means this story deserves your like and your subscribe. Help us complete 5,000 likes on this story. It is the target set by my mother for you, and your support makes it possible. And tell me in the comments from which city you are watching this cold case story, because every city has stories, and together we will keep uncovering them.